Hey guys, welcome back to Mo's Game Table. Today I'm joined by Mike Denson, the designer of Last 100 Yards from GMT Games, and he's going to talk about Last 100 Yards as well as the Airborne expansion that he's got coming out here pretty soon. Mike, thanks a lot for taking the time to join us.
Good morning. Thanks for having me.
Talking about your game.
Yeah.
Let's talk about Last 100 Yards. It's been out now, what, a year
Since
and a half? June. Okay, almost a year now. I thought it was like
a year in June.
Yeah, it'll be a year in June. And how well is it sold? Do you know? Is it doing really well?
My impression is doing well. I've never done a game before,
numbers,
but yes, my impression that it's doing well.
Good. And the reception you've gotten from people?
Reception, primarily through the internet and some of the blogs and the Facebook, it seems to be well received. So it's good.
What was the genesis of the idea? Because the thing is, you know, we've all played games. You and I have talked about this before. ASL, Lock and Load Tactical, Conflict of Heroes, Fighting Formations, Combat Commander. We're not short any type of tactical games out there by any stretch, which is fantastic for tactical gamers. But what was it that you saw that was you wanted to do differently, and how did you come up with the idea for Last 100 Yards? Because it is definitely a different system.
Well, actually, I never intended to be a designer. It kind of happened by accident, so I won't go in that long story. But once I got into the project, you know, I've always trying to, with a board game, especially on a tactical, how do you manage a simultaneous field? Okay. The other thing is that, you know, you always have this eye in the sky type concept that, you know, you can see everything going on the board, and, you know, I'm going to sweep around your right flank. Well, by the time I get there, you're waiting on me because you saw that coming. You can see me coming. Okay. So, you know, how do you mitigate some of that? And I really wanted to try and not model weapon systems like most tactical games do. Yeah. I want to try and model the behavior, and so wanted you to feel what the company commander pressure might have, or that platoon leader, or that tank commander. So some of the systems where, you know, I thought in my mind, well, it's action reaction, because wherever there's an action, there's a reaction. I mean, the vast majority of time in small arms combat is self-preservation. I'm going to stay in my hole, okay, and I'm not going to willy-nilly shoot at anything that moves because I give away my position and fighting mortar fire and enemy fire to come in. So self-preservation, you know, I want to get you up close and personal before I shoot. So I wanted the behavior in every system or concept. I wanted to get some of that behavioral aspect in there. So the simultaneous piece, one of the things I'm trying to do is squinch down the movement, so things are snapshot. You're having in a lot smaller segments. I didn't want to burden the game with, you know, do you want to shoot me here, because that's very sequential. Yeah. Because then I can move this guy out here and make you to shoot that guy, and then I can follow with another, and just, you know, that's not how it happens in real life.
System.
So in 3 minutes, you know, everything's kind of moving at once. So the action reaction piece is kind of a function of that, where, you know, I'm going to fire at you when you do something. So the initiative is a big part. Most games have an initiative, but in this one, the active player actually gets a player turn, and the other player doesn't get a player turn. Yeah. And he's very limited in what he can do to reaction. So if he doesn't see something, then he can't react. So now I've mitigated some of that eye in the sky stuff. If I move around the left flank and I happen to use a terrain efficiently where you can't see me move, well, then you're not going to be a react with your units. So now if I'm very fortunate and be able to keep the initiative for 2 or 3 turns straight, in other words, before you can react, okay, then I can actually make a good maneuver and pull off a flank attack. Resolving fire after all of the actions instead of as you go. Again, you know, fire's not resolved in real life in one incident. It's all going on at one time. So I originally had, for each infantry, for each unit, I had a little target marker, and it had his ID on it, and so I was placing it on the enemy. Well, I had so many target markers out there, and I had to go look for the unit that fired. I said, yeah, this is just not going to work. So I thought, well, why not just put the DRM on the guy? I don't care which one fired. So we created the concept of the DRM markers, which represents the volume of fire against any particular unit.
And type of fire too, because there's different.
And type of fire, you have the green counters are small arms fire specifically, they have certain effects. Anti-tank fire is a yellow counter. It's only against units that have an anti-tank defense, obviously. And then mortar fire is really interesting in the sense that it can be a killer, but more importantly, it pins a unit in place, and he can't do anything. He's just done. So now I can put a mortar fire on a unit, and I can maneuver people up adjacent.
Exactly.
And they're not going to be able to react.
Yeah.
Okay. So, those are some of the things that the simultaneous aspect, which resolving the fire after the fact, because you're not going to know the results of how all that went till you until you resolve your fire.
Sure.
So the simultaneous feel, trying to include the behavior aspects for the units. And I can't remember now. Beyond that, how those are some of the key things. And it's interesting because, as I said earlier, it kind of started by accident.
Yeah, I was going to say, that was my next question was going to be, is you said designed by accident. So you're a designer by accident, not by intent.
No.
Tell us how that happened.
Okay, so I lived in Austin, real big game group, mostly ASL, and I play other games too. Operational is my favorite, but so I moved back home in a small town, Palestine, Texas. No gamers there except my brother, and I live in the country. I'm 14 miles from the nearest store, so it's a trek to get out and play, and there's nobody in town. So I had not seen my cousin in 30-something years. He's an ex-Vietnam vet. He'd never seen a game before in his life, but really in kind of reconnecting, he came out and we tried a few operational games. He wasn't interested. He doesn't want to read the rules. He just wants you to tell him how to play. And we drank a few beers, and he tended to like the tactical games, and ASL was way too much. Combat Commander he didn't care for. So I literally pulled counters from one game
And create something on the fly.
from another game, and we'd play and make up stuff as we go and drink a few beers. Well, after he'd come every Friday, so like after a month or two, I said, I got to start writing some of this down because I forgot what we did last week. Okay, so that was the basis of the rules. And over 3 or 4 years, I got an outline of the rules, and as I introduced it to other players or other people I knew, they said, "Man, you really got a good game here." Nah, I don't want to be a designer. And so finally, I'd been in it 3 or 4 years. I had had the artist that I found. She had already done 52 maps for me. We just played at home, and I made my homemade counters, and so we played away, and it began to take shape. And they say, "Well, you need to approach somebody." And so finally, one summer, I don't know, 4 years ago now, I called Dean Essig, who I used to go to the HomerCon a couple of times. So Dean, we know each other. I'm not a best friend or anything, but I really respect these games, and OCS is my favorite. So I called Dean. I said, "Dean, look, I think I got a game. I don't want you to. I'm not looking for Multiman to publish it, but I respect you as a designer, and I want you. You're probably the only one I know. So I want you to. Can I come up and you play it and tell me what I got?" So I drove to Illinois. We sat in the kitchen there, and he's home with Sarah, and we had a little kitchen table. We set up and we played for a day and a half. Now he took time. He took his time out. He was just completing the BCS at the time, and he took a day and a half of time, and we played 4 or 5 scenarios or missions, and he really seemed to like it, and actually wrote me a little blurb, promoting the game, and which he allowed me to use. And he said, "Don't ever let them change your initiative system. I don't care who you go to. Don't let them change it." So from there, I got back, and GMT was the largest kid on the block, and I felt like I'd get most exposure. And so I noticed that GMT had a GMT warehouse event in November or October. So I noticed in reading about the blurb that there were some designers there. And I thought, well, I'm a designer.
Best place to go.
So I called and told the lady I was a designer and I'm going to be out and whatever. So I flew out and I showed up, and a lot of 100 players there. And I said, "Well, who runs GMT?" And they said, "That guy does." I said, "What's his name?" His name's Gene. Okay, so I went and approached Gene, and I said, "Well, Gene, I think I got a game, and so I want you to try it." So he sat down, and so for the next 3 days, he had some of his lieutenants play,
Yeah.
to get an idea. And then he said, well, I'll get back to you. And so a couple of months later, I heard from him, and then I had to go to Dallas
Yeah.
in front of Tony and Mark, and we scrambled at Tony. We played a mission on Tony's table, and so they about a month later they took me on. So when I said by accident, I mean literally just by accident.
Well, I mean, it's a great thing for anybody who's played last 100 yards. First time I sat with Mike and he demoed it to me, if you haven't played it, I should say, the easiest way I can describe it, and I've told this to Mike too, is stop motion real time. And by that I mean you're setting up your situation, you're moving your guys, you're applying your DRMs like you were saying, based on the shots you're going to take. And it's almost like pre-programming everything, even though you're not, but it feels that kind of way. And then at the end, you resolve it all, and that's when you see this deadly dance all come together. And it really, you have to change how you think about it, but when you do it, you're like, yeah, this is different, but yeah, it works. And it really does.
Oh, I play it all the time, obviously.
Well, I know you have, yeah.
But I
played
mean,
it once or twice.
I'm biased, obviously, but I think we abstract a lot because I want people to focus on tactics. And what some of the comments that you see online a lot is that, it's not real regimented. Yeah, I can do these things, but there's a penalty for it. There's a rule that doesn't say you can't do it.
Yeah.
But, it's just like a real officer. I can charge that position against that machine gun. I know I can do it, but is it really the best thing to do?
Well, that's the thing where a lot of times, like you had mentioned before, and we've talked about this too offline, and a lot of gamers suffer from this. Mathing the problem out, which is great in a Euro, and even in war games, you're mathing the problem. Well, I need to have this much, and then it'll be 3-to-1 odds, and then I'll get a shift left. That's great, but if you're mathing the problem out too much, then it's just a math problem, and that's the thing about the tactical game is you're trying to model the chaos, and you never know what's going to happen, and that uncertainty is great, and that's where you take away from that regimented thing a little bit. And you put the gamer in the position of commander on the ground, whether it be platoon leader or company commander, or even squad leader, and you're having to fight through that chaos. And that again is the different mind shift with this game compared to others.
This game really promotes chaos, and that's intentional.
Yeah.
It really challenges the players in control because the best laid plans, last as long as that first bullet's fired.
Sure.
Okay, and after that, it's chaos. So you can't control what goes about. But it has a very chaotic feel, and it can shift from turn to turn.
Yeah.
So it's not one that once shit starts going downhill,
Yeah.
You can't reverse it. There are ways and events that can happen that can reverse that. So it keeps you in the game.
Yeah, no, that's good. Now you're working on the Airborne expansion. Talk about that a little bit.
Okay, so Airborne, we are in the final stages of play test. All the counters are done. We haven't sent them to Art yet, but the counters are done. All the maps are done. We've got probably 2 or 3 missions left to play. So I'm hoping to have that ready and get the GMT by sometime in April. So one of the challenges relative to the behavioral aspect in dealing with elite units, because in the Airborne module, it's primarily dealing with Normandy Drop and Market Garden. There's a couple of missions that deal with actually where you fall out of the sky. You have assignments where you have to go and you have to assemble. But beyond that, you have primarily elite units fighting other elite or irregular units. So one of the problems per se, if you want to say, or not a problem, but how do you represent an elite unit?
Yeah, the challenge. Yeah.
So this easy thing to do is he's elite, so I'm going to increase his firepower because he shoots better. Well, I would venture to say that for the American Airborne, they had the same weapons as an M1 Garand. It didn't shoot any better or straighter than the regular infantry guy did. Okay, and you can find marksmen on either side. So it really didn't make sense to increase the firepower. Okay.
Sure.
The other thing, their morale there much better morale. Well, in the game, when you get disrupted, okay, which is when you take a hit, you want to call it, if you get disrupted, it doesn't mean in my game that you panic or that you've routed. It just means you've gone to ground, okay? So, and until you can recover, you're not going to participate in combat, for example.
Sure.
So, if you're an elite unit, you're probably No, I mean, I would venture to say that elite unit is going to go to ground when he's shot at just as quick
as
as a
fast as
regular
anybody
unit.
else, yeah.
So why would, so I couldn't justify that. So how do you do that? So the difference is that a couple of ways, is that the elite unit's going to recover a lot quicker. Okay?
Okay.
Now he'll go to, when he gets shot at, he's going to go to the ground just as the same as a regular unit, but he's going to get back in the action a lot quicker.
Sure.
And so in recovery, there's a rally as a subset of recovery. So if you recover, if you roll a modified 1, you rally, which means not only you recover, you can take an action as well.
Yeah.
So now, an airborne unit's not only going to recover better, he's going to be able to rally on a 1 or 2, or if he's got a laser, a 1, 2, or 3. So he's going to get back in the action much quicker.
Well, you can attribute that to, in a thematic sense, to the higher stress level of training that an elite unit gets versus a regular line troop.
Correct. So then another big factor is that in the game, if you're disrupted somewhere, and if you're not in line sight of enemy, I'm referring back to before you have to see an action, you can't attempt to recover. Well, an airborne unit can recover anywhere, anytime he's eligible to recover. He doesn't need a leader, he doesn't need to see anybody. So there's an initiative factor that they're going to get back in the action quicker. But the biggest factor is that in the game we have this coordination role.
Okay.
And coordination role, at the beginning of your turn, normally you activate a single platoon at a time, you conduct your actions and all the reactions, and that's a platoon activation. Well, if you get a coordination, if you're successful, which right now for regular infantry unit is 8 or better. So if you get a coordination role, well, the elite units have a coordination of a +3. So 60% of the time, they're going to activate 2 platoons at a time as if they're 1.
Okay.
Okay? Doesn't have much impact as long as you're maneuvering toward the enemy. But once you get within enemy, it's extremely powerful because you're going to get a lot more encirclement bonuses on your I can now take 6 or 8 units that can provide suppressive fire and activate as one formation, increases my chance for encircling units, suppressive fire, versus when I'm just doing
Better
3.
unity of command compared to regular line troops. Yeah.
So that's how I represent the elite, and it I didn't have to increase the cohesion, I didn't have to increase the firepower, but you look at the behavioral, the training, really the teamwork and the coordination, the teamwork and the overall command structure allow them to pull off these more difficult maneuvers much easier. So I think it's a much cleaner system. It works really well, and it's pretty powerful when you stick a company of airborne against a regular company of infantry. Once they get amongst you, it's tough.
Yeah.
And for example, your regular infantry, you're disrupted within 50 or 100 yards of the enemy. If you get disrupted again, you're going to take a step loss. Well, now for the airborne, because they get a -1 or they get an advantage on the recovery, I don't have to fall back to avoid.
True.
Now, because I got a 70% chance I'm going to get back in the fight versus a 50 or 60% chance.
Sure.
So they're just they just keep coming.
What about the next one after this? Are you going to continue to stay with the West Front, in Normandy and the Airborne, or are you going to maybe go look at the German side, do like Fallschirmjägers, or maybe go to the East Front, or potentially Pacific?
Okay. In this module, the Airborne, there's, for the American countermix, there's going to be 2 airborne companies and 1 regular, which will finish out the battalion for the first module. For the Germans, there's 1 Fallschirmjäger unit, there's an SS company, and another regular. So moving on, as soon as I'm done with this, I'm working on the Russians. In fact, we've already begun getting a good draft. The game system is going to be almost the same, so their only difference in nationalities is going to be the nationality and the characteristics of how that nationality fought.
Sure.
So we're really looking at the behavioral differences and organizational differences on how the Russians would fight.
Yeah.
For example, the initiative level wasn't, from a command perspective, wasn't pushed down as far. So where if you have a Western, German, British, or American, you have a Western platoon, you have 1 squad that maybe is going to maneuver, you're going to have 1 suppress, 1 is going to hold in reserve, or whatever. and also you'll distribute support weapons through that platoon to
Sure.
get to do that assignment. Okay, if you're Russian, it won't be that way because they didn't really have the initiative in the squad leader level. So if you activate a Russian platoon, all units in that are either going to fire, or they're all going to maneuver, or they're all going to do whatever.
Yeah.
Okay, so you won't have that flexibility. Support weapons, and they'll have a machine gun platoon. They won't be divvying out the weapons.
Yeah.
You know, they'll act as a platoon. So their behavior will be different. So we're probably 75% through with that. I'll probably have more armor engagements in Russia.
What's the locations in Russia, like where you're looking at?
I don't really
Kursk,
know. We're probably
Stalingrad?
going to take some operations somewhere initially. It's going to be probably 44, 45.
Okay.
Because I intend to use the same German counter mix. So when I do the Russian module, they'll probably just have Russian units and maybe a few special units. So you'll
Yeah.
probably have to have the first module to play.
Yeah.
Okay. So we'll probably pick out an area, and there'll be 10 or 12 missions within that area, counterattacks or whatever that we'll do. It may not be Kursk, it could be some operation.
Yeah, no, I was just curious, because I know that's one of the things people are going to want to know is, well, what's going to be on the East Front? Now, Pacific, what do you see? One of the interesting things about this is the contour of the map, using contours on the map and the heights. Now, Normandy is, there's the bocage and there's, a lot of undulating terrain. But when you go to the Pacific, you're talking dense jungle, which really, when you come to the shorter movement that you have in the last 100 yards, it lends itself to that in tight brawling. What do you see as potential design issues to overcome if you were to look at a Pacific version?
Well, we've already started working on a Pacific version. I have a volunteer, Christian Snyder. He's a major in the Army at Fort Hood.
Okay.
He's over, I think he's second command over, I don't know if it's a battalion, probably.
Nice. Yeah.
Okay. Nice guy, really PTO aficionado. He approached me last year at San Diego and he wanted to do a PTO. So we've already got 4 of the maps done. Okay.
Nice.
And he's doing this kind of on his own, with a little guidance. We got 4 maps done, and we've already pretty much developed the characteristics of the Japanese, which I'll cover in a second. But to answer your question, if you just jungle fighting, it's boring. Nobody wants to do jungle fighting.
True. Yeah.
So, if you do have a jungle fight, it would probably be something more like a sweep, where you have little trails, and you'll have ambushes.
Sure.
It would be something similar. We have Module 12 mission in the first module, where you may have concealment markers, and when you bump into one, you'll roll to see what's there.
Sure.
And there may not be anything,
Yeah.
but you'll have sweeps and stuff. But he's starting on Guadalcanal, and most of the areas in Guadalcanal, there were some jungle and stuff, but a lot of the ridges, certainly around the airfield and all that, was mostly palm plantations. It was kind of open when you look at aerials, and really most of the engagement took place. They maneuvered through the jungle.
Yes.
But you really didn't have that many. You may
Didn't have a lot of firefights in the jungle. Yeah, it was over open.
So if we do firefight in the jungle, as I said, it'll kind of be where you have a company that's spread out on some jungle trails, and they're going to get ambushed and get cut off and stuff like that.
Sure.
Fairly low density events. The
Characteristics of the Japanese you were going to talk about.
Oh yeah, okay. So leftover from ASL, kind of like the old bonsai rule. So Russians and Japanese in certain ways do. For the Russians, for the Japs, you might call it a bonsai. For the Russians, you call it a human leg.
Yeah.
But both ways. But they did it for different reasons. The Japanese, with the Bushido codes, were very cultural. They're going to fight to the last man.
Yeah.
And if they were told to charge and take that position, they're going to do so.
Yeah.
So what I've done there is that I've increased the cohesion of the Japanese.
Okay.
They're going to be 7s or 8s. They're going to be really, really tough.
Sure.
So small arms fires, is going to be on the attack. They're going to be able to charge and take less to go. But Japanese are not going to disrupt.
Yeah.
They'll take a casualty and keep coming.
Yeah.
So They'll be really tough on the human wave. They're going to get in your lines and they're going to be tussling, and you better hope that you had some guys in reserves to throw in there as the American player, because they have a tendency to overrun you.
Yeah.
All right. Another fact that there's typically was 4 squads to a platoon, and one of the squads was a knee mortar. Okay. I can't not say famous, but it was a fairly useful weapon for the Japanese. So we'll have a unit that has a knee mortar. He has a special characteristic. So basically every platoon now has some type of indirect fire instead of, say, just per company or per battalion. So that helps some. So now with the Japanese, especially on defense, it plays very tenacious. If you got a 7 or 8 cohesion that's in a improved position or a fortified position, you can shoot all day, but you're never going to suppress him. Well, you may suppress him, but you're never going to disrupt him. So as real life, you have to climb that ridge or that hill, and in the face of the enemy fire, and just go in there and root him out, because you're not going to get him out in an assault. So what we found was in playtesting just the characteristics of the Japanese. I think the best type of rule, is to have an effect without a rule. So when you start playing the Japanese, you naturally realize the strength of the Japanese is their culture. And they're willing to just, blindly go take that hex and carry out that assignment or defend to the last man. Well, naturally now, and the firepower for a Japanese squad has been reduced, say, from a typical squad, it's 1. The Japanese had a light machine gun, but number 1, it was a lighter caliber. You're only firing a 6.5 millimeter. Okay, their powder and their rounds were not quite as good as the U.S. But the main reason is that really depending more on assaults than they did fire. Okay, and the light machine gun was a clip fed, was also prone to jam. So we reduced the firepower, which further the Japanese. When you start playing them, you realize that their strength culturally is that they want to engage. They want to engage.
They want to close with and engage.
They want to enclose, because when they get up and hug you next and close, they're really nasty. So it's one that you didn't have to write a rule. So from a nationality perspective, there's probably 2 or 3 rules that we'll have that deal with the Japanese, but everything else is going to be a natural occurrence, because you're going to just, this guy can't disrupt me.
This is just going to this is the way it's going to be.
I'm just going to send them in there. And so it's similar from the concept of not having disruption, okay, and you take casualties instead. That concept also carries over for Russian, but for a different reason. It's not cultural, it's doctrinal. You're cannon fodder.
Again, if you try to run back, you're going to shoot.
We're going to send this platoon here to charge this village, so that, and it's going to die, but I'm going to be able to locate where the hard points in the village are. And because of this platoon sacrifice, okay, now I'm going to be able to concentrate on those points. So the Russians, some units will some units will disrupt your machine gun sections, and some of those will disrupt. And maybe some elite units will disrupt. But your vast everyday plain Russian infantry will be dispensable. Okay, so they won't disrupt. They'll just take casualties and keep coming. Another interesting aspect that we found about the Russians is that they tended to attack in column. So you might, and really we'll take company as a better example, but I don't have company level. But if you had a battalion attack, for example, they tended to send this company in, and it got as far as it could get. We couldn't get any more. This is a doctrinal thing. The lieutenant pretty much says, we've done our job, so we're done. We're not going to go any further. Okay? Now, if he fell back, he'd probably get shot, because they would feel he didn't do his job. So he had to lose some of his guys to demonstrate that he did his job. Then they're going to run another company right in behind him, and it's going to get just a little bit further. The first company's not going to help. It's just going to hold its position. And then you basically just keep running another company in, and they're just going to wear out. So instead of attacking on a broad front, we're going to attack on a narrow front.
Just hammer you.
And we're going to continue hammering blows in the same place. But instead of having any one time, you never have more than one company involved, because all the others have stopped where they ended, and pretty much So to model that concept's a little bit hairy, but it's been really interesting brainstorming and thinking about, without getting into a whole 3 pages of restrictions on what the nationality is, how can we create something without a rule that's going to force a certain behavior
Yeah.
that's going to simulate that particular nationality.
Without adding a bunch of chrome, it's just going to work that way organically.
And it's like the Elite we did for the Airborne. I mean, there's about 3 sentences,
Yeah.
okay, that describes some of the advantages for the Airborne, and that's it. That's the only change.
Now, after last 100 yards, after you've got all these, because you got all these projects going on with the different fronts and the different nationalities you've been working on, do you have any ideas for another design outside of last 100
I
yards?
do, but I don't have, yes. I want to take the engine dealing with the initiative. We didn't talk too much about the initiative. But for those that hadn't played, the side that wins the initiative gets a player turn. The other side doesn't.
Yeah.
So you have this, like a football game, you have this momentum.
Yeah.
And there can be something that happened, a fumble or an interception that can change the momentum of the game. And this one, for the attacker, the worst thing that can happen is he loses the initiative.
Yeah.
Okay. So I want to carry that over into the American Civil War.
Okay.
And I want to take it to a company or maybe a battalion, but probably a company level World War II.
Okay.
But something that hasn't been tried. So like ASL and last 100 yards, you know, you can say, well, this action took place during this time, during this particular operation, but it's not totally historical.
Sure.
Not the exact TOE or whatever.
Yeah.
All right. So I want to do something similar. So just imagine that you have a game that you have the units at a company level, all those units of a division. Okay. And for both sides, you have a divisional, and you have divisional assets, and maybe you have some armor assets and other stuff that will go with it.
Sure.
But you'd say, okay, this would be the 82nd Division at Bastogne.
Okay.
I don't remember if it's 101st, 82nd.
101st. Yeah.
So it's 101st at Bastogne.
Yeah.
Okay. Now you have generic units, but you have, when you look at the battles of the 82nd, you know, it's not necessarily a whole battle because you had an engagement up here at, you know, at what, Marsh, and then you have other engagements around. So you can have, I guess you could at some point have the whole battle at a stone at a company level, but it really more that I have a counter mix. The operation is Bulge, and it deals with all the engagements that the 82nd did.
Okay.
Okay, you may have some regular armor units that are support units that come in, but it might be these outlying areas where you only have, maybe you got a battalion involved, or 1 or 2 battalions, so that they're engaged. But instead of like the last 100 yards currently, where I have a company involved, one company, it might be 5 or 6 companies, a 2 battalion operations where the German 5th SS was coming through March or coming through some of these other villages.
Yeah.
So, but similar, same engine, in other words, action, reaction. The initiative, the action, reaction would not be so much now in line of sight.
Okay.
It would be something where, you know, for example, if this battalion, which would be 3 units of a company and in support units, if one of those got attacked, for example, then any units in that battalion, the other 2 companies, they can react immediately.
Yeah,
but now the upper echelon would be regimental. You have a regimental headquarters. And you'd have some device or way, whether you spend an operational point to attempt to now react with one of the other battalions in the regiment.
Yeah.
So, but there's never a guarantee. You may spin your op point, but you still have to roll and they still not respond.
Yeah.
And then from the regimental, you have a divisional level, but now that can control divisional assets, again, based on some type of situation.
Keep stepping back out,
Then you step out. So now in a divisional level, you may could actually send a unit from a regiment, another regiment somewhere or something of that nature. But, that's, so it wouldn't necessarily be played the Battle of Bulge.
Yeah.
It would
You'd
be
be
a
zooming
Bulge
into one section
operation,
of
but
it,
it would be on a divisional level, and where the units are counters, and you just have 10 or 12 missions regarding engagements. So there'd be historical engagements, roughly, you know, well, there was battalion, you didn't really know what the strength of battalion was at
Yeah.
at any one particular engagement at any one time. You probably could dig that deep, but
Yeah.
from a mission perspective, I wouldn't worry about it. But
Well, that sounds interesting, and you know, again, unique, and the initiative system is very unique in Last 100 Yards. So it would be pretty cool to see that again in another, you know, taken in another direction slightly, and stepping back just a little bit at a higher level, but still having that tactical feel to it. You know, distancing yourself a little bit so you see in a little bit bigger picture, but not too much to where it's completely abstracted, which is really interesting.
yeah, well, I think one of the things, again, I said earlier, that seems to be some, a lot of responses from on the internet, okay, on the game, is that there are lots of decisions to make during play.
Yeah.
And it's tactical decisions, you know, if I do this, and there's nothing simple, because for every decision, there's 3 or 4 options that can occur.
Sure.
So it's very challenging, and without having the detail. Now, the last 100 yards, there's a lot of it. There's a lot of depth. There are a lot of tools in the toolbox.
Yeah.
There's not just a maneuver. For example, tanks. There's 3 or 4 different types of maneuver tanks can do.
Yeah.
So it gives you much more of a tactical feel with that particular individual unit or formation, and to carry that over to a larger scale, you know, the simpler the better. If I can abstract where they're focused on maneuver and tactics,
Yeah.
okay, and again, it'll be a chaotic system. You may need this guy to activate and send you another battalion,
Yeah.
but he may not do it. So,
Yeah.
and
That's the way it works. You know,
that's right.
Real life doesn't work as simple as there. It's not procedural like a game can be, but that is the big challenge, and that's where people like you, the designer, by accident in your case, come up with ways to model that and make it where it's a fun game for us to enjoy. But that is a really good look at the last 100 yards, and then as well as your other projects that you're working with, and the next one after that. And I really appreciate you taking the time to stop by, Mike, and chat with us. Everybody will get a little bit better look at last 100 yards,
Cool.
as well as what's coming next for last 100 yards. And if you have not played last 100 yards, I definitely recommend checking it out. If you go to a con that Mike is at, he will definitely sit and play the game with you. So, and you'll learn it right from the designer, and it's the best way to learn a game. But thanks a lot, Mike. Really
Thank you
appreciate it.
appreciate it, Morris.
Stop by, and we'll talk a little bit more afterwards. But thanks for tuning in, guys. See you next time.